The Electoral Regional Library is proud to host the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Counts and Legacy. Tonight is celebrating Dorothy Counts Scoggins. Once again, the Charlotte-Mecklenburg presents Legends and Legacy with special guest Dorothy Counts Scoggins. Right now, in University, microphones are provided. Thank you.
Okay, I don't want to sit in front of. Let me sit on the side. That's okay.
Okay. Got it. Oh, we're back.
Hey. Wait. This is perfect. You want these at home? Yeah, this is the slide. This is the slide.
Okay.
Okay. Hey, haven't seen you in a while either. How's it I will show you that. I got that in the mail today.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Herbert White. I am editor-in-chief at the Charlotte Post. And for those of you who are new, this is our fourth and final installment of our inaugural Legends and Legacy series. We are celebrating Black History Month, and we took it upon ourselves as a company to do a little bit more beyond just helping folks read about their history. We're giving opportunities this month for people to actually interact with people who have made it. And tonight, we have a person who is one of the pivotal figures in Charlotte's climb towards a desegregated society. Miss Dorothy Counts Scoggins was one of 4 Black students to desegregate Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools in 1957. It was not an easy trip to make, as I'm sure you will all find out if you didn't know already. So we're not going to go on and on about setting the stage. We're just going to dive right on in. So please give it up for our guest, Ms. Dorothy Counts Scoggins. So since I did the introduction, I'll go ahead and get started with the first question too. Give us an idea of that backstory to when you walked through the door that first day of school in 1957 at what was then Harding High School, and it's today's Erwin Avenue Open. So set the tone for us. What was that like?
Well, I'm going to go back a little bit further, and I was talking to this young lady here today and telling her, as a matter of fact, I just met her, and she's here in the library and getting history, doing her research, because what she's going to do is she's going to, for her Black History project, is going to be me. But anyway, I think that instead of going through the door, I will get to that, but I think we need to go back a little bit further and talk about the fact that day when I got to Harding and had to walk the 2 blocks to the door. My father, that morning when I got up, my father has a colleague who came to the house, Dr. Tompkins, and he's the one who's in the picture. A lot of people think that that's my father, but that was Dr. Tompkins, and he was a colleague with my father at Johnson C. Smith. And he asked my father, is there anything that I can do? And he said, maybe you should go with me because I'm not sure what we're going to face when we get there. We lived a couple of blocks from there because we lived on the campus at Johnson C. Smith University. And when we got there, the street to Harding was blocked. It was barricaded. And of course, there were police there. So my father could not take me down to the entrance of Harding. And so he let me out, but I will always remember what he said to me. And he said, you're not inferior to anyone. You can do whatever you want to do. Hold your head up high and be proud of who you are. So I had those words to carry with me as I made that journey, and I call it a journey. And so he asked Dr. Tompkins if he would get out and make sure that I got to the school. So as we proceeded to walk, of course, in the picture, and today, the daughter of the man that picture that traveled the world, that a lot of you have seen, this is his daughter, right here, Don Sturkey was the one who took the picture. And this is his daughter here, and his niece, right? And so, anyway, as I proceeded to walk, the streets were lined. And at that time, there were houses on that street. A lot of people were in the yards. A lot of people were on the porch. And of course, they were in the street. And it was not only students, but there were also adults. And so I remember my dad said, I'm tall, hold your head up high and be proud. So as I proceeded to make that 2-block walk, this is when all of the harassment started from the students. I was pushed, shoved. Of course, they had signs that said, go back to Africa, nigger. And they also said that to me as I proceeded to walk. They threw things at me, and rocks, sticks, whatever they could find. And I still held my head up high and kept my eyes on the door. Because that was my goal, was to get to the door and get inside.
Of course.
But the other thing I need to say, there was a woman in the crowd who had formed a white citizens council prior to all of us going to school that morning. And she was at Harding. And she told the girls, spit on her, and told the boys, don't let her get through that door. So by the time I got to the door, you can imagine spit was dripping from the dress that my grandmother had made for me to wear to school the first day.
That's a lot to go through. And then you throw on top, it's high school. High school students are different from middle school kids.
Exactly.
They're almost adults, and then there's all the other stuff that goes on when you're a high school student. Did you have a sense of what was ahead of you when you got up that morning? Understanding that this is also a time in America where the same thing was going on in Little Rock, Arkansas. Some southern states had threatened to close their public schools rather than let black students in. Did you have an idea of the gravity of the moment?
No, and the reason for that, and I said to my father afterwards, why didn't you tell me? And what he said is he knew because a lot of threats came to the family, phone calls, people coming up in the yard, and throwing things in the yard. But he didn't tell me those things. And he said the reason why, because he did not want me to go there in fear. So I did not have any idea that kind of thing was going to be waiting for me when I got there that morning. I mean, I always say that I grew up in a world where I was sheltered. You know, I had 3 brothers who protected me, and also my dad. And so he didn't say anything to me. I knew that it was going to be different than for me when I went to West Charlotte, because that's where I was assigned to go to high school, in black high school. But at the same time, I had no idea that people would be there to do the things that they did to me just because I didn't look like them.
It's one thing to make that 2-block walk. Once you got in the door, that was a milestone. And then there was the actual schooling part of this. What was it like for you once you finally got into class and the reaction of students and teachers to you?
Well, before I got into class, once I got into the school, into the auditorium, you know, no one greeted me, so I had to find a seat. I sat down. The principal was there. He was talking to all of the students, and then he never called my name, but what he said is, all the students that are in sophomores, you know, you need to move forward. So I got up. Prior to that, the same kinds of things that were going on outside were going on inside, in the auditorium. And no one said anything. None of the adults. So I moved up in the area where I was to sit with the sophomores. And then, of course, we were excused from that area to a classroom. And when I went in the classroom, I was ignored. And I remember very vaguely, even at my age now, that there were 2 teachers in the classroom. We were to go in there to get schedules and pick up our books. And it was actually my homeroom classroom. And the homeroom classroom was next to the principal's office. And so when I walked in, no one said anything. I sat down. It's like they turned their backs on me. They didn't say anything. And so finally, I did get my books, and I got my schedule. But there was no correspondence in any way between us during that time.
When you say no one, teachers, principal, nobody said anything to you?
No, none at all.
So it was a total silent treatment.
Oh, exactly.
And then, so did that go on for the duration of your time at Harding?
So this was on Thursday. The school started on Thursday. So when I got my schedule, I got my books, and I walked outside, because we only were there for half a day. So when I walked outside, Dr. Reginald Hawkins was waiting with my dad. And he was the one that escorted me. Again, the street was barricaded. Dad couldn't get down into the circle to pick me up. So then he was the one who escorted me back up the street to get in the car on 5th Street. And when I went home, of course, we talked about it. My parents asked me what happened, and I shared information with them. And they said, well, you know, what do you want to do? I said, well, I'm going back. You know, I'm not going to allow that to keep me from doing what I know that I have the right to have the same kind of education that everybody else has.
How old were you at that point?
I was 15. And so that morning I woke up on Friday, and I had fever and sore throat. And so back then you could call the doctor and they'd come to the house. So Dr. Rand was our doctor, and my parents called him, and he told my parents that I didn't need to go back that day, but he thought I'd be okay over the weekend. My father called the principal, and he told him that I would not be there that day, but he would come and pick up any assignments or anything that I needed to have. But he assured him that I would be back on Monday. So I did go back on Monday. And when I went back on Monday, Of course, the street was not barricaded. He was able to take me down, into the circle. I got out and I walked inside. There again, no one said anything. But they were surprised because they thought, because I wasn't there on Friday, that I wasn't coming back. But they don't know me. So when I walked in, I followed my schedule, and going into classrooms, same kind of thing that happened that first day when I was going in the homeroom. I went in my homeroom when I first got there, and then of course I followed my schedule. When I went in classrooms, teachers ignored me as well. I had assigned a seat to sit in the back of the class. So I raised my hand. No one called on me. So that was, I just said, okay, I'm gonna fight this. And so that happened on Monday. And then on Tuesday, I was sitting in the cafeteria, and a group of boys circled the table where I was sitting, and they spat in my food. I picked up my tray and went to put it on the conveyor belt, and I walked outside. And when I walked outside, a young lady came to me, and she started talking to me. And she said to me that she was new. Her parents had just moved here, found out that she lived not very far from me in the Smallwood community, which was not close to Hardy. And so we started just talking as teenagers too. And so when I went back inside, the same kinds of things that were going on in the classrooms the previous days were still going on. Each day when I went home, my parents always asked me, how did it go? And I shared the information in terms of things. And what do you want to do? I said, I'm going back. And so the next day when I went back, and I ran into her, and she was coming down the hall as I was going, we passed each other in the hallway, and she dropped her head and she didn't say anything. But I knew what it was. And so that day was the same as usual. And then the next day, what I said to my parents that morning, I said, I can take a lot of things, but I can't go to school all day and not eat. And I'm not going to eat food that someone has spat in. So they allowed you, back then, they allowed you to leave school and go home at lunchtime. Somebody could come pick you up and go home for lunch. And then they would just have to make sure you got back in time for your class. And so I said to my dad that morning and my mother, I said, can somebody come and pick me up? I'd like to come home for lunch today. And when I was preparing, standing in the hallway at my locker, which was close to the principal's office, I was hit in the back with a blackboard eraser, and a sharp object hit me in the back of my head. I got my sweater out of my locker. I walked to the front door, and when I opened the door, I saw my dad's car parked in a circle, and the back window was shattered. And I found out that my oldest brother was sitting in the car because my dad had sent him to pick me up. And that's the first time that I was afraid, because not only was the things that they were doing to me, I felt over time that those things would cease, but now it's not only me, it's my family. So when we went home, my brother said to my dad, tell them what happened today. And I shared that information with him. And he said, no more. So he got on the phone, called the superintendent, and also he called the police department, and called the police chief. And he told them what had happened, and what had been going on. And the superintendent said, well, we got no reports from Hardy of anything that was going on. And so my dad said to the police chief, he said, I need to know if my daughter is going to be protected. And he said, I cannot guarantee that. So that's when he decided that that was it.
You then left school.
I left school. And one of the things that my dad and mother said, specifically my father, he said, I want to make sure that I could have gone back to West Charlotte because that's the school I was assigned to. But they sent me to Pennsylvania, to a suburban city outside of Philadelphia, which was Yaden, Pennsylvania. I had an aunt and an uncle who lived there. And they sent me to live with them to finish out the school year. And the reason for that was because my dad said he wanted me to be in a situation where the schools were integrated, because he wanted me to see that just because what happened to me at Hardy, it didn't necessarily mean that everybody was like that. So it was the only high school in Yaden.
Mm-hmm. Did the notoriety of those first few days at Harding, how did that play out in terms of how you approach things moving forward? Was that something where, did you look at it as a failure, or was it just opening a different door that you could use as an opportunity?
For me, it was a failure. But on the other hand, it was my hope that at least what I did those 4 days would be that I had opened the door in the future for others to come. Of course, that didn't happen until 10 years later, but at least it was a start. So when I say failure, it's because I'm the kind of person, anything that I do, I always want to be successful. That's just me. And I knew that going to, when we talked about my going to Hardy as a family, and I can say that there were some things we talked about in terms of possibilities, but it was hard for me to be able to really believe that people would treat me that way. I mean, I'm not saying that some things might have happened, but the kinds of things that actually happened. But I grew up in a family, not only with my parents, but with my grandparents, that taught me that you accept people for who they are. And you're not judgmental. And so that's just ingrained in me.
Mm-hmm. Moving forward a few decades, I recall, I guess it was maybe 2-3 years ago, you went back to the campus. Mm-hmm. By then, it was Erwin Avenue, and there was a great deal of ballyhoo. Media folks were out there, and then there was another kind of photo. This one was in color. You were surrounded by kids of all races, all persuasions, and they were hugging on you like it was like Beyonce showed up or something. How did that make you feel after all that time to come back to the scene of the crime and be treated the way that you were?
Well, I think, first of all, that I will never forget. And the reason why was because that was done by 2 elementary school children at Erwin Avenue. And one of them was the former superintendent, Ernest Winston's daughter, Morgan. What had happened was they had gone to D.C. and they went to the African American Cultural Museum in Washington. And I'm in that museum. The picture that your father took,
The Sturkey photo.
no, Sturkey took, is in that museum, me. And so they were looking at it, and he said, do you know who that is? And she said, no. And he said, you need to do your research. So she came back, and she found out that the school they were attending was once Harding, because they went to Erwin. So she and a friend of hers, that in the Girl Scouts, what they decided to do was that they were going to do a reenactment of that day. And they were going to do that, and they were working on their silver badge. And that's what that was their project they were going to do. And so they called me and said, reserve this date, but they didn't tell me what for. And a couple of days before that, they asked me to meet them at Erwin, and that's when I found out what was going to happen. And so, for me, when I think about it, yes, there was a lot of hoopla. The kids were wonderful. The pictures were great. The media was there. Politicians were there. Charlotte was turned out. But what was important to me was that two little girls that were in the 6th grade thought enough to do that, and no adult thought to do something like that. So for me, that's the feeling that I have, and I have an album of pictures that they took that day. Yes, I have, the city declared that Dorothy Counts Scoggins Day and all of that. That's not important to me as much as what those kids did. And so, and then not only that, they had a fundraiser to raise money to buy a bench that they wanted to put at Erwin with my name on it. When they went to Lowe's and told Lowe's what they were going to do, Lowe's said, we will donate the bench. So they donated it and installed it. And if you ever go to Erwin, you will see it. It's on the right side when you're coming down toward the door of the auditorium.
Did that event, in a way, did it close the circle for you from 1957 to today?
Nothing's gonna ever close the circle. And I tell people it's a part of my life. When you come in my house, in my den, I have pictures on the wall. And the picture that Don Sturkey took, I have it 11 by 14 framed. And it's hanging on my wall. And underneath it, there was a picture of me sitting in the auditorium of a young boy who's making a terrible face, and that's the picture that traveled the world. Mm-hmm. So this is what people saw in other countries in terms of what was going on in this country. And that was given to me by a black collector here in Charlotte. You know Quincy Lee? That's who he gave it to me. It was sent to him by someone with United Press, because he collects all kinds of things. And he had it framed and gave it to me. So I have those hanging, and people say to me, why would you want something like that hanging in your house? And I say, because that's my life. And what happens is I can look at that and every day and say, I do what I do because of that. And that's a part of my life. So I'll never close the door. The only time the door will close, when I close my eyes.
Use your microphone. Use your microphone.
I'm sorry, this gentleman didn't introduce me. My name is Erwin Johnson, I'm the CEO of Publisher. Cut it off.
My fault.
Cut it
Yeah,
on.
Turn it on, too.
They heard me. Is it on now?
Yeah,
I will sing you a song.
it's okay.
You're 15 years old. You're going through this trauma on a daily basis. Help us understand sort of how you, on a daily basis, went through the process mentally just handle this challenge on a day-to-day basis?
Well, Gerald, I think a lot of it has to do with, I mean, you know, you grew up in the same era along that I did, and I think a lot of it has to do with me growing up in the family I grew up in, and as I said, my parents and my grandparents. And the other part of it is I have a very, very strong faith. And I'm not going to say that that didn't help me to get through that period. People have asked me, well, you know, did you cry? Did you do this? I said, I'm not going to tell you that I didn't, but I didn't do it in front of them. And I think it's just, and then I had my parents, but not only did I have my parents, Gerald, I had the whole community. You know, like I said, Dr. Tompkins came that morning to assist. Reginald Hawkins came that afternoon to make sure that I was safe and get back to my dad. And then there were other people. We had a close-knit family growing up in those days, and you always knew that they were there for you, and I knew that. So I think a lot of that I know a lot of that had to do with that. But the other part of it is, it's just who I am. And I tell people, you know, we are born, I always say, God put me on this earth for a reason. And my reason is to serve. And so to me, that was a part of serving. But the other part of it, I felt that I had the same right as they did. And as my dad said, you know, in the speech that he did, the press release after when I was leaving, you know, I'm an American citizen just like anyone else. My parents paid taxes just like anybody else. So I deserved the right to have the same education. Not only that, you know, it had to be, you know, we had to do something because that was 3 years after the Supreme Court had passed and nothing had been done. And so if you look at that and think in terms of it, that somebody had to do it. And my dad always said that was the right one to do it because he applied for all 3 of his children. But I was the one, and he said that was the right one to be able to do it. He said he knew Wilson couldn't do it. That was my brother who was a senior in high school. And then my younger brother, Howard, would have gone to what is now Bruns, that was Seversville. But they only picked me. And he said, but Doc was the right one to do it. If anybody could do it, Doc could do it.
Wait, hold it. As time passed on, you ended up having a lot of the same students that did the things to you, going through that, started befriending you. Tell us some of that story.
What do you mean, same student?
Well, when you were going through the situation at Erwin, you had people that spat on you, did all of that.
Right, yeah.
Did some of them started coming up and apologizing
Right,
for?
okay. When we had the 50th anniversary, the late Crump,
Steve Crump.
Crump, he did a documentary, and it's called 9457. And what happened was there was a young man who's in that picture, and his name is Woody Cooper. He was a senior at Harding at the time. And he saw the picture that was taken, and I think the picture that was taken, the Post took a picture of me with him after he and I met, as a matter of fact. But he contacted the Observer, and he also contacted the TV station, I can't remember which one, and he said, I'd like to get in touch with Dorothy Counts. And they contacted me and said, you know, can we give him your information? I said, give him my email address. So he emailed me, and he just said that he wanted to ask for my forgiveness. I had to sleep on it. And the reason for that, because this is 50 years later, and I had not heard from anyone during that time. And so the next morning I got up and I said, you know, I know that what I have been taught. So I responded back to him and I said that I forgave you 50 years ago. And so what we need to do is we need to get together and make sure that what happened to me didn't happen to another child. Because that's what I decided at 15, whatever I did in life, I was going to make sure that it didn't happen to another child. So he and I got together. We went to schools, churches, as a pair. And we talked about that experience, but not only that, we talked about the forgiveness between the two of us. And so in Freedom Park, there is a bench, and it's called the Forgiving Bench. And he and I dedicated that bench. So that's the one person that has gotten in touch with me.
The only one?
That was the only one who contacted, no, I'm gonna take that back. The young lady that I met at Hardy, about 20 years later, I got a letter forwarded to me that she had sent to the Observer. And she, in the letter, she was saying, I want to tell you why I dropped my head. And she went on to say that she had been threatened. Her parents told her, you know, to stay away from me. And I knew that. I knew that was the reason. And so she said, I just wanted to explain to you. So we corresponded for a short period of time, but after that, we just, you know, we lost contact. So there were two. It's ironic that I'm here today. Today, I'll go and open my mail. And this was sent to me today. It says, hello, my name is Linda Davis. Although we haven't met officially, I know who you are. I graduated from Harding High School in 1960. She would have been in my class. And during your brief time as a student there, you were in my first period class. I understand that this might not be a pleasant memory for you, but it is our connection. I have wanted to speak with you for some time, but have been unable to arrange it, so I'm writing to you instead. I want to personally apologize for the treatment you received during your time at Harding. While I did not personally harm you, I also did nothing to help you. And for that, I ask for your forgiveness. Over the years, I hope I have grown not only wiser, but also braver. If a similar situation were to arise today, I would handle it very differently. I acknowledge that I have racist tendencies, and for that, I apologize. I am not overtly racist, but I recognize that racism exists deep within me. I am not proud of this, but I am aware of it. I have been working and continue to work on improving myself and unlearning old prejudices. It is a difficult process, but I strive every day to grow. I hope you will accept this note in the spirit it is intended. Once again, I am deeply sorry for the way you were treated by others and for my inaction. Sincerely, Linda Davis. Now, that takes a lot for someone to do that. And not only that, if she was to graduate with me and in my class, she's the same age as I am. So she's 82 years old. So if somebody can come forward at this point in her life and apologize, and I will respond to her, because I think it's very important. But what I say, I travel all over Mecklenburg County, and I tell people that I have been to every single independent school in Charlotte. Latin, Providence Day, Charlotte Christian, Northside, all of them. And I go and talk to the students, as well as Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools too. But I go and talk to students about my experience, and my hope is when I leave, if it's just one child, get something from that. And so that's what I do. That's all of this has made me be the person that I am, Herb and Gerald, because we can't, in this world, we cannot go around in terms of hating each other. We need to work together and bring unity, and especially now in 2025, as we go forward.
Yeah, it just goes to show you it's never too late to do the right thing.
Exactly,
Okay?
exactly.
We've got a few minutes. Let's have a little Q&A. Are you okay? Hands, anybody? Right here, in the black jacket?
Integrated. So the story's a little different, but similar in a lot of ways. When you speak about the children, I love my grandparents, and I'm sure the person who wrote that letter loved her grandparents, but that's where I feel those seeds are planted.
Mm-hmm.
So from a standpoint of trying to work on the adults as well, what would you say we can do about that, or what have you seen being done about that?
When I talk about children, that's why my focus has always been on the younger, young children, because I said if we can teach them at an early age, hopefully by the time they get to be 15, they wouldn't be doing the things that the kids did to me. Now, what I'm realizing now is a lot of the adults have no knowledge of our history. They can't teach it because they don't know it. And so, yes, I'm glad to see in this room that there are people here and that are adults. And I always felt it's your responsibility to learn and to take it back. And not only that, you need to teach your own children. What I say is, and it's our responsibility to teach our own story. But you can't teach your own story if you don't know it. And a lot of people will say, well, that happened back in the day, and I don't want to talk about it. We're not at that point anymore. And, all those I hear all those kinds of things, especially when I talk to adults. They say they don't want to talk about it. And I said, but that's who we are. That's what has happened to us. And if we don't talk about it, how our children or the next generation and generation after that, how are they going to know so they'll be able to handle it? And, I think there are conversations that need to be had. And I always said, in one place it can start at home, and the next place it can start in the faith community. But a lot of people don't want to do that. I hope that gives you well.
All right, thank you. Yes, sir?
I want to thank you all for being here. My name is William Gaston. I come to every one of these. I've never met you. I've seen you on TV. I've seen you everywhere. No, we're going to dap it up. What you went through, I watched it on TV. And I couldn't believe what I was saying, but then again, I could. My name is William Gaston. I was born in old Greenville, old Double Oaks, and Druid Hills. And I come to every one of these meetings that they have because I want to know. I already know a lot, but I still want to know. And to see you, it's a blessing.
Thank you.
I thank you. You're welcome. And you know I thank you. Keep it real and keep it 100.
Yes, ma'am, right here.
Thank you, and thank you for being so brave and informing us tonight as well. What is the reaction to the students in the different, so you go from the early childhood up to high school, speaking to students. So what generally is their reaction to when you start to tell them your experience?
Usually with younger children, they're in awe. It's hard for them to believe that and even I'd say, when I say younger children, I'm thinking in terms of elementary and middle school children. They're just in awe, they can't believe it. In high school, it's not different. You know, a lot of them say to me, well, I couldn't have done that. I wouldn't allow anybody to do that to me. And if somebody did that to me, this is what I'm going to do. And I say to them, and if you do what they did, then it makes you no better than them. So to me, not only am I telling my story, but I'm also hoping that I'm teaching them a lesson. Now, when I go in some of the private schools, they're primarily white students. So my message to them is I want them to know, because they have no idea, and they're not going to be told. And I've had some that have been asked a lot of questions and have been very much engaged. And I have some who have said to me, well, that's just the way it is. But that's what they're taught. And they're not going to change. These are high school kids, and I understand that. But in that circumstance, if I have one of them who walks out of that auditorium or that classroom and said, oh, I need to think about that. Maybe there's something I can do. And I always offer to them that, think about that. What can you do at school or in your community, and in terms of to make sure that these kinds of things don't happen? And so, and that's what I usually lead with. I challenge them in terms of thinking, in terms of, what can they do, and now as they move forward in life to ensure that those kinds of things don't happen. But, as she said here, she's not a racist, but she's got it in it, but that's born. And same thing with these kids.
Yeah, a couple more. From the Sturkey clan.
Thank you so much for telling your story. One of the questions I've always had for you over the years is, what did it mean to you for James Baldwin to have your photo and your story be so impactful, his return here to the States to be part of the Civil Rights Movement?
Well, I mean, that was very powerful. To think in terms of, for him to have seen that in another country and say, why wasn't somebody there to help her, okay? And I'm gonna go back and decide to come back, to this country. So I guess for me, it was what I did, that for him to think in terms of something that's something that he needs to make sure he puts on in a book so other people can know that, you know, that's important to me. You know, a lot of people say I'm just humble in terms of things that happen. You know, I appreciate a lot of things that have happened, you know, but at the same time, you know, there are certain things that did happen like that. Big part of Woody coming to apologize. You know, I'll never forgive that. And I didn't share. We became friends. We broke bread together. We not only did we travel to other places and talk about our situation, but when he was in hospice care, his wife called me, and I went to the hospice up in Huntersville, and the nurse said to me, "You can talk to him. He can hear you." And he had his eyes closed, and I did, and I stayed about 2 hours. His wife Judy was there, and I left, and she called me the next morning, and she said, "I just want to let you know, I appreciate you coming, but he died 2 hours after you left, and I think he was waiting on you." So those kinds of things that happened in my life, you know, there's on one side, he was a part of the group, and as he said to me, he said, "I was in the group, but I didn't do it. But my forgiveness is because I didn't do it. And I should have done something to help you." So those kinds of things mean a lot to me. James Baldwin as well, and believe it or not, I also heard from Billy Graham.
Really?
And I got a card from him, a postcard from him. And of course, I have, you know, I got letters from people all over the world and stuff like that too, but there's certain things that I will always remember. You know, your father, in terms of the times that we got together afterwards, and his pictures are in books all over. And so those things mean a lot to me. You know, it doesn't take much, but though I have certain things, young ladies that did the reenactment, also, it says, you know, those things. So, but the other part of it is, then I have said, you know, what can I do to give back to ensure that these kids have what they need? There are 2 people here tonight from Garringer High School, and I had a pilot program at Garringer for 3 years for 15 girls. And I'm proud to say of those 15, 13 of them graduated from Garringer, but now those 13 have graduated from college. You know, it was a mentoring program I had at Garringer, and now I have a mentoring program, and it's called the Dorothy Counts Scoggins Mentoring and Social Justice Program. And it's West Charlotte, Harding, and Philippa Berry, and I have 17 students.
That's great stuff. One more, and then we're gonna call it a night. Anybody? Oh, we got hands all over. Okay.
Thank you. Was it not for me? And it appears. Thank you. I have a question about your life before you took that brave walk to the front door of the school. Did your parents ever take you to the Brevard Street Library? And did you ever meet Allegra Westbrooks, whom this building is named for?
Yes, I know Miss Westbrook very well. You know, what happens is when you grow up in the black community, you know everybody. And so, not only did I go to Brevard Street there, but, you know, there was the YMCA on there as well, and that's the building behind the old United Way, the white building that they use for storage. Well, that's the only place we could go. So yes, and I met Miss Westbrook, and I knew her very well because, you know, as I said, And Jack knows that, you know, and growing up, and Gerald knows that too. When you grow up in a black community, you know everybody. So, yes, I did know her quite well, yes.
Vision for you, as far as that would keep your focus going from, you know, on the end goal that you went throughout.
I know, as I said, my father was a Presbyterian minister, but he was also a professor at Johnson C. Smith University. That's where he graduated from, undergrad, as well as in the seminary, and came back and he taught there for 30 years. We lived on that campus, so education for me, that's all I knew. I mean, from, you know, a young child, it was stressed, and so growing up, that was just a part of our life. The other part of it was family. And people my age, and maybe Jack's age, but we grew up in families where families were a tight-knit family, and family took care of each other. I tell people that one of the things that was hard for me, but I have grandchildren and great-grandchildren, was hard for me is I grew up in a family where we ate together breakfast and dinner. And it was required that we be wherever we were at dinner time. When my dad came across the street from his office, that we all had to be there, and we ate dinner together. And the one thing, usually after he said prayer, the question he asked, how was your day? So as a family, we had the opportunity to be able to share what was going on in our lives. So both of my parents knew that. That doesn't happen today. We live in a microwave society, which is what I say. Our children don't sit down, my grandchildren get their meal, go and sit down someplace in front of a TV. Or they have all kinds of electronics and and I think that's the piece that's missing. But for me, that's what helped me in terms of staying focused, growing up, because of the fact that I was able to have the communication with my parents and talk to my parents, and the same thing in terms of them talking to us. And so, but I know things change, but I tell people I'm old school. Some things never change. And that's a family piece for me. It's hard for me to see when children don't have the opportunity to be able to sit down and have those conversations with parents. And sometimes I think if they can, some of the things that are happening to our youth today would not be happening.
Thank you so much. Yes. Yes, sir. And that's.
You have to ask him, he's my Facebook. Mr. Garrett, you Brad too.
Last week, I was talking with Charles Fagan, the sculptor, who did the Captain Jack statue down by Central Piedmont, and also the one of Billy Graham in the Capitol building. And I mentioned being here at this meeting, and he suggested a statue of Dorothy on the trail of history along Sugar Creek. And I didn't bring that up, didn't get here early enough to ask her if she would be agreeable to that. I think it would be, I haven't started the process to get it going yet, but there's a site that you can look up, just enter Charlotte Trail of History, and the contacts and everything are on there, place to donate, and it should tell something about the present ones that they have on there. So I hope she'll be agreeable to that.
Okay. Yes, you all talk about that. But first, let's again thank Dorothy Counts Scoggins for being here. And that's right, stand on up. Show some love. Give her a little flower.
Thank them as well, you know, for inviting me to come to be a part of this.
In all honesty, we're just doing our jobs.
Really.